we can start.
Awesome. Great.
Hi, Alessandra.
Hi, Yael. Great to be here.
Great to have you. I'm excited actually for this conversation because it's been a while that we wanted to share a lot of things, and we have a lot in common. And thank you for joining me today. First of all, would you please present yourself?
Sure. So I'm Alessa. I'm originally from Switzerland. I'm both an entrepreneur and investor, kind of been that in parallel for most of my career, or either one or the other. I'm the founder and CEO of Top Tier Impact. We're the global ecosystem for impact investors, impact entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, famous figures in sustainability. We're across more than 40 countries. We have a very active private community. We also have units for investing and fundraising. We have a strategy consulting unit for climate risk scenario planning, and we have a policy unit for policy work in sustainability and energy. So that's a little bit of a quick overview of what I do day to day.
It's amazing. I've been following you since a long time, and actually your activities and overall experience is amazing. So congratulations on your achievements. It's really amazing. The network that I see that is purely and simply extending over time, and you have some great names from the industry. So, I mean, go for it.
Thank you.
Alessa, how would you describe the current state, the current global state overall?
Yeah, so we're going through, since a while now, since COVID really, we're going through this phase of hold on a second, what have we been up to? What are we doing? Does this make sense? And it's not really stopping, yeah. And actually, I think that this is going to escalate in various different ways. I think that from a climate perspective, there are some efforts being done, but the reality is that based on the science and what's coming, we're not even close to doing nearly enough. And so I think that in the next 4 or 5 years, we will see some system collapses of sorts. And we will just see some of the repercussions. And I think that the repercussions are quite complex, obviously, by nature in this field to predict, because there's so many different things involved. And there's the social component, there's the natural component, there's the economic component, right? And so I think that we're living through unique times. And so I want to add in there that even though this sounds like a lot, it's quite unique. But it's also exciting to be living through these times and seize them as an opportunity to focus on real change, because we need everybody right now to focus on that.
Absolutely. I've been reading a lot of statistics and numbers consequently to COVID and also to the global crisis. And Bloomberg last week announced that there are 8 million people dying from global pollution every year. Right. Which is dramatic, and it's this is really concerning. And I've been reading a lot of statistics also regarding whatever is related to food and many other damages. How did you personally make it through the crisis? What are the tips and tricks that you can, after this crazy year, tell us a bit, from an entrepreneurial perspective and also from a woman overview?
Yeah, well, on a personal and professional note, I have to say that I've been doing very well. And I guess the main thing is I've enjoyed not traveling. I think it was so overdue and it was so needed. For myself, my system and everything else, to just be much more all in one place. And I find myself, even now that things are opening up in many countries, I just find myself not particularly inspired to travel. So this has been a fantastic one. And I think that, I was already on an inner journey, on personal growth anyway. I see that as a parallel theme, a continuous parallel theme. It's not like, oh, I'm doing my things for 6 months and then I stop for 1 week and I do that, so it's it carries on, and it's about how I show up for the world, you know, for the people around me, for what I do and put out in the world. But I find that obviously with COVID, we've all had even more of a buffer for that, right? Just by virtue of being still. And so that's been fantastic as well. And it's been a continuation and perhaps an acceleration of what I was already doing. You know, I think that in a way, COVID has accelerated so many different things. When I reflect about it, you know, it's been an accelerator of certain trends, like personal, professional, I think also for the world, obviously, to realize where we're at, you know, at this point in time. So I have to say that there are so many things that I've enjoyed from this crazy year.
It's a great lesson on humanity, I think. Whatever is related to our activities on a day-to-day basis, but also to our action to come, and upcoming agenda as human beings, but also, you know, as being perpetually on the move is not something that, as you mentioned, you know, traveling is not that important, I mean, or imperative. And we saw that we can do it over video calls and being, you know, aware about our time frame that we allocate, you know, to exchanges. But I think that, you know, somehow on the human side, we need to share and to be in groups from a multidisciplinary point of view. And I was wondering, how can we make these connections over digital tools and, you know, connections, and bringing up enough diverse people and personalities to make good things happen.
Yeah. It's a very good point, Yael, because I find that the way this has happened for me is that I actually have a community here where I am. I've been in Asia, in Thailand the whole time. And there's an amazing entrepreneurial community, like people in various sectors, like people coming from such different angles, but you know, a lot of common grounds. And so I found myself having this on one side, and then having all the amazing things that I do, so to say, online, right? Like with all my work. But in a way, finding it even easier to, on one side, like be in my physical space, right, with a community, and then on the other side, manage all of these activities and, you know, be able to not have to travel to conferences, right, do everything online, like not travel for important meetings. And so you make me reflect on this, because I think, wow, I don't think that I was so present and connected from that physical community side of things before COVID, ironically. And so I obviously don't think that, you know, in some countries this has just not been possible at all. But I think that in a way it calls us all to reflect even more on, you know, where do we want to be based and how do we want to go about that, right? And then sort of like reflect on it in a more grounded way as well.
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that somehow you realize that you can find a new balance in terms of well-being, but also in terms of activities and purposes, which is, I think that it's great. From, you know, on the long term, we're gonna just figure out that, well, wait, you know, what's just happened is just something that is awesome for us as in our evolution, you know, from different types of activities, and realize at some point that we didn't really need it became, you know, somehow something that we have to roll out on our own path, also as human being and also as women, you know, because my following question is about, you know, what would you share to other women to get on stage, I mean, or to make it on the entrepreneurial journey, since COVID helped us just realize that we can do almost everything online.
Yes. So the question being, would I encourage that to do more online?
Yeah, first is what type of, first of all, is, do you encourage other women, or would you encourage other women, you know, to take that that trip on this new journey like an entrepreneur? And what would you say, you know, to your younger self somehow?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice one. I would say definitely stay as grounded as possible in what makes sense. So what truly makes sense, you know, for you and what you naturally enjoy, for what your natural skills are, which ideally tend to overlap with each other, for what brings a positive contribution out there, for what has a clear market and a clear need, right? Because sometimes like all of these things there, they can align, and when they align, that's bingo, right? But sometimes like we really want to pursue a certain direction because it excites us, and then we get a bit more unrealistic about the market itself. I think that would definitely be a, you know, advice for younger me, you know, getting excited about certain markets or entrepreneurship or learning certain things, right? And so really staying as grounded as possible with looking at the full picture, right? And with kind of assessing where you're at, where you're going. It's a mix of having that boldness, right? Because that is needed anyway, right? It's never going to be perfect. That picture is never going to be perfect, right? So it's just a matter of, I think at the same time, also plugging into your intuition, frankly, and feeling like, okay, well, it seems like I have enough here, right? I have a good market, I have something I enjoy, I have something that aligns with my lifestyle, and then really going for it and not expecting either to have a perfect plan ahead, right? But being able to sort of like adjust along the journey. And I know that this is like, you know, this sounds very obvious for startups, but it's something to really feel, right? I think that it's something, again, to ground into, right? To be able to understand and listen, right? Listen to the market feedback, listen to people's comments, listen to your own inner guidance, right? Listen to all of these things, and then like go through with the journey.
Yeah, I feel that we're getting more and more aware about what's going on in the environment somehow, because I mean, following the pandemic, everything seems flat on the same grade, and we can access, you know, to diverse levels of categories of people, and everything seems to be accessible, but it's also very challenging. And since everything, you know, is like connected, and that's something that we were looking for so long. I know that, you know, from the very beginning, 20 years ago, on the web, we were trying to promote the fact of communities, interconnections, you know, forums, etc., about exchanges. And right now we're so overwhelmed with so many messages, so many notifications and things like that. I mean, the perspective here is really different. It's becoming quite difficult to find the right path about what's being, you know, all around and what's happening all around. And I was wondering, you know, what's your take on selecting the right path? How do you feel and vision the near future? What would you be able to tell us about, you know, the decisions that you can make, you know, as a leader and as a visionary?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it really depends on the type of leader and the position. Like what I say to, you know, the broader market and large companies as well, at the end of the day, is that what's going to happen, it's, you can already see it. You can already see the first signs, which are big pieces of regulation coming out on climate from governments, right? And this is good, but the reality is that, and this is a big adjustment already from a corporate perspective, right? Because our consulting unit works with corporates around, you know, it's things like called TCFD, it's a task force for climate-related financial disclosure. So we see it's a big adjustment, it's a lot of work, but the reality is that these are helpful measures, but like I said in the beginning of our conversations, like they just start scratching the surface. And what's going to happen with the way that things are going to unfold, like in the next years, is that more and more of that kind of regulation will come. So what I actually tell leaders from a broader market perspective is to understand that being proactive right now might look like cost, might look like a lot of effort, but it will more than pay off in the future. A lot of industries will end up with stranded assets. Like a lot of industries will, not make economic sense anymore. And, and certain companies will be in positions to like continue to survive, to thrive, and others will, it just won't make sense anymore. And so I think that it's, it's one of those things where I say, if it doesn't necessarily speak to you really from the heart, right? Like, I need to take care of this for children, for the next generation, like that's fine. But from a pragmatic perspective, you should also know, so it's like one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, I think the pragmatic angle is why so much more is now happening. And then I would say that for entrepreneurs that are sort of like starting their journey, or perhaps thinking about starting their journey, it's much more about being flexible and visionary at the same time, because so much is changing so fast, and it can be scary, and it can be like, wow, I can't even start grasping all of this, and I don't want to deal with it too much, right? Like, I'm just taking it step by step. But I think that if as an entrepreneur, you actually fully lean into that, right? You lean into all of the change, and actually you start imagining how that's going to play out, how it's going to massively change things, then you can really be onto something. Yeah. Because there are going to be giant gaps opening up. And so I think that for wannabe entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs starting their journey, it's much more about, stay present with whatever fears or whatever overwhelming things come up as you face this picture, and then fully lean into it to find the directions that come natural to you.
Yeah, right. We talked a lot about, during our last conversation, we talked a lot about activities and focuses on climate change and the dangers, and also being proactive, as you mean right now. What's overall the next step? What are, the next step for you, in terms of, I know that you've been involved in blockchain, but also in impact, and tell us a bit more about your news and
Yeah, so Top Tier Impact really is a platform. We are an ecosystem, and so we have different units that tackle the adoption and the growth of positive impact as a way of investing and running companies. They tackle it from different angles. It tends to be systemic. So in other words, it's not just about one specific vertical, one specific sector, but it's much more horizontal. How do we make the entire space more efficient, right? So that's kind of our angle. And I would say there are ways both through which our existing activities are growing, right? And like the next things that are coming, and then potential new things. But right now, I would say that it's very much of a phase of, I continue to have that loop, but it's a phase of settling, creating more processes, doing these kind of things, because it's a typical entrepreneurial journey where the venture changes so fast, evolves so fast, and so you continuously need to adjust around it. So that's sort of like the current situation. Mm-hmm.
Well, the landscape seems to follow that wave for a while already, in terms of process, defining the right goals, also mixing in between the technology and what is usable and what is feasible on the long term. I feel that overall people are trying to build for the long term, looking for sustainability and a lot of practice, and also resilience, and build from the ground up resilience. I've been, involved for the past couple of years already, much harder in everything that's related to sustainability. And we have this newsletter growing, over week. Everybody seems to be really interested by sustainability and impact. Now, I'm again looking for how can we help people make it happen. It's like, how can we help them build the pillars, also from a decision maker point of view, but also from a policy point of view. what's your take on it? How can we make the bridge
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah, it's really the entire ecosystem, and the public and private sectors moving hand in hand as well, right? Because when you have changes in demand, whether they're purely driven by customers or they're driven by the regulatory landscape, then, you know, these changes can either impact positively or negatively companies. And so if we're saying, well, how can we create the best conditions for sustainability to be both adopted in existing industries, so that they don't freak out and think, oh my God, this is something we need to fight because it's terrible, right? And then also to be easily and positively embedded in like the new divisions or companies or initiatives that are coming up. And I'll give you an example. I'm originally from Switzerland, and I saw with great disappointment how Switzerland voted against adjusting their laws towards the Paris Agreement. And my initial reaction was obviously super upset and shocked. It's like, I can't believe.
Why?
And then I was reading through it, right? Because like these are important things to understand. And I haven't been there, right? So it's not like I'm following the daily news and seeing all the comments. In a way, this is even better, right? Because then I can zoom out more easily, or I can look at the full picture more easily. And I saw very quickly how the way that this has been shaped up over penalizes rural cantons, rural areas of Switzerland, people who move a lot by car, because frankly, there is no, you know, if you're on one mountain and you need to go to the other mountain, you need to have a car. And the car lobby is very, very strong in Switzerland, right? So the car lobby was extremely upset about this. And so were other ones, obviously. But you know, it's not about, oh, they're bad, like they should adopt this. It's more like, well, how do we make this more balanced, right? So that it's not disproportionate, because then the urban cantons were in favor for it. And you could say, oh, it's because they're more educated. But the reality is that it needs to be evened out, and it needs to be thought of as, well, how do we make it, you know, like whether it's subsidies and other ways, like how do we make this a win-win for everybody? This is super important. And you know, and so as I say this, I hope that other countries also, you know, most countries are not quite as democratic as Switzerland, right? That gets to vote on these things, right? And frankly, I have to say that on things like this, it's pretty good, right? That they don't have to do that, because it's just kind of like, yeah, one way or the other, I would have liked for Switzerland to move in this direction steadily. And Switzerland is so affected by climate change as well. You know, the reality is that especially in rural cantons where there might be like a big ski season and all, right? So, but unfortunately, it's easy and it's understandable that people get sort of like scared about, oh, what is this going to mean? More cost here, more cost there. So I think it's just super important to approach these issues and design these things in a way that is win-win. Now in Switzerland, you could say, well, this gets exposed and rejected by the entirety of the system if it's not done in a more balanced way. So I think that it's for other countries to look at that and think about, how are we not going to over-penalize certain parts of the population? Because, you know, even if they don't get to vote on it, they're not going to be happy about it. And that's not going to have like nice results for the country itself, right? So really thinking like, how can we make this even? How can we make this a win-win? How can we put forward the positive sides of this as well? How can we create real opportunities out of it and market these opportunities? I think the UK has been doing a good job on many fronts, and the UK has been, you know, the forerunner on many things that relate to climate. So that's been very pleasant to see. And I believe that they also have an approach where there's a lot of focus on the subsidies and the good programs, and, you know, how to turn this into an opportunity. I think that's very important going forward for countries to try and do that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that overall the UK is doing great in terms of equipment in city and urban landscape, in terms of focuses on pollution as well. I think the inhabitants are also quite involved, contrary to many other countries, and the population understands and is being much more aware and also clear with the goals to save the planet. But I think it has to be, you know, a global effort, as you mentioned. And it's I think that, if we engage in any type of activity, or, within the next few years, it has to be also related to whatever is about, climate change. It's becoming an imperative. And I feel that the way to get there is also to have much more women involved in such activities. And I'm curious to have your thoughts about, why we don't have enough women sitting at the
Yeah. Well, let's look at the bigger picture, right? And let's face the reality, because the reality is that our systems, our economic and political systems, have been shaped for centuries and centuries in, depending on where the audience is at, these would be like familiar ways of expressing it, but, in a very masculine type of way, right? It's a system that is from various corners, like not balanced. Like if you just think about masculine and feminine values, like in a more abstract way, and you think about on one side the natural collaboration and nurturing and balance, like of the feminine, and then the drive and the control and the authority of the masculine, we've been completely on this side of things. Yeah. And there's been a friction, there's been a fear on both sides, and so if I think about, for instance, like my career, because I've reflected about it, and, I started working in very male dominated environments. I still am, all the way through. And as people would say, I'm quite, I'm good at handling that and showing up, in my power in that. But I've realized that it's only more recent years that I've actually felt comfortable embracing more feminine aspects of myself in the way that I shop through my work, because it felt not safe, and I wasn't aware of that. And so, all I wish is a world where not only that feels safe, but actually the balance is there, because the reality is that we wouldn't be in this mess from a climate perspective if we had much more balance embedded in our systems. And this is really the case, like across the board. And so, this could be a very long discussion that you and I could have about it, right? But I think the bottom line is we need it both for the sort of the fairness, right? And the ethics for everybody, for every human to be welcome. And it's not just about male versus female, right? It's so much more than that. So we need it from that human perspective, but then we frankly also need it from a systemic perspective. We need better balanced systems. And this kind of leads us to blockchain technology, because even though the crypto and trading side of things has been hyper masculinized right now, actually this technology at the core, this distributed system, have very feminine values embedded in them. Its distribution is aligning everybody's incentives with your incentives. Like this is a massive failure that we have globally right now, and that has led us to all these negative externalities and all of these problems, and frankly a lot of sufferance, like from all humans involved in this, which is that optimizing for your individual interest is not naturally aligned with everybody's interest. Absolutely. For me, this is a key point. For me, this is where our society needs to evolve beyond. We need to evolve beyond, because this is just like a road to disaster. And so for us to have both systems and then humans awakened enough to understand this point, that acting in the collective interest is the best thing you can do for your own interest, right? To inherently understand that, right? Understand that you're part of an ecosystem, and the human species, just like any other species, evolves as an ecosystem. We don't evolve as a single species. It's been proven, in the history of like evolution, right? Because it used to be incorrectly understood. It's been proven scientifically as well that it's actually about ecosystems that develop and evolve in balance, right? And right now we're completely out of balance, because we have, and this is impressive, right? We have advanced so much, especially in the last few decades, from a technology perspective, from a way that we've put ourselves on top of the food chain, right? It used to be dangerous to be a human in the jungle, right? And now we have plenty of ways for that not to be the case. And so, well, that is incredible. And it's, it's a sign of an intelligent civilization as opposed to just nature, right? And animals. At the same time, it comes with its consequences, right? And so we've pushed very far on one side. And I think this is kind of the proof of fire for us as a species, like to be able to balance things out, to be able to understand that with great power comes great responsibility. And it's time to show up with that responsibility and embed it in the way that we do things for our own benefit and for everybody's benefit.
Very smart. And I think that, you know, just to mention that human beings are representing 0.1% of the global species overall, and we're doing, you know, more than 75% of damages on Earth. So I mean, it means a lot. And thank you for mentioning those great points, actually, because I feel that on a global mindset, we still have a lot of room to perfect and to ameliorate, you know, the level of the global sharing and the global collaboration in terms of diversity ethics, as you mentioned, but also in a way that it's inclusive and enough protecting and safe for overall. One last point that you want to share, please.
I would say
so going on. So
I would say it's kind of like my motto and something I believe in and something that I've embedded into top tier impact, you know, as a global community where people can really make meaningful connections for advancing their businesses, their investments, their companies, whatever it is. It's focusing on solutions instead of problems. Sometimes I read these fancy, elaborated problem explanations, and then I either approach the person or I try to find any hint of, okay, like you got the problem really well. What do you think the solution is? And there's just crickets, nothing, right? And I think that's completely disbalanced. And frankly, that's not particularly helpful. So focusing on solutions rather than problems, because I think there are some very complex, well, more like there is a complex path to finding simple and elegant solutions. I was actually having this discussion yesterday with a colleague of mine. I was really forcing him. I was like, what do you think is the solution for this? We're just talking about big things, you know, what is the solution? And that's not an easy question.
No.
And it's not an easy answer, but once you get to the answer, it looks easy and elegant because that's what you can push through, what can be implemented. So that's one thing. And then focusing on action rather than complaints, you know, like putting out complaints, like it's just damaging to yourself. And it's not helpful to anybody. And so I think for people to take responsibility of whatever it is that bothers them and see it as something within themselves to clear, to solve, to move beyond, so that they can have a better life experience and that they can focus on things that are positive and exciting.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I had this conversation yesterday about action. So whatever is happening. Thank you, Alessa, so much. I know that you had a few news about the awards that you wanted to share.
Yeah, so in terms of anything to share, so we're running, Top Tier Impact is running the Global Impact Awards. We cover all economic sectors, so agriculture and food, energy and environment, which includes oceans, reforestation, climate tech, obviously that's a big one, and various other sectors like health and tech. And so we are taking applications until end of the month. Very excited for the companies that are coming through. And and then I'll have later in the year, I'll have content coming out in the blockchain space, but really like looking at the blockchain technology and the blockchain space as a force of positive system change, which is why I approached it many years ago with so much interest, and which is why I'm still so excited about it day in and day out. So we will talk with the global blockchain leaders about how they see that as well, right? Because most people see that too when they're running these large companies and they don't get to talk about it. So we'll be diving into that. And I think that's about it. Yes.
Well, great news. A lot's going on. We'll be happy to support anytime, of course, and happy to collaborate also. Thank you, Alessa, so much. That was a great interview, and I'm wishing you a lot of luck. And wait.
Thank you, Yael. Thank you. That was really fun.